Job is divided neatly into three parts. The prologue section, which is chapter 1 and 2, where we sort of read about who Job is, we read about his family, we read about his initial suffering. It sort of sets up the story. The prologue section of Job sets up the story, chapters 1 and 2. And then it goes from the prologue section to the dialogue section, which is chapters 3 through 42, verse 6. And that's the biggest section of Job, where Job and his friends and God, they're all dialoguing, they're talking. There's a big conversation happening. And then we get to the epilogue section, chapter 42, verses 7 through 17. And that's the section where the story is summed up, so to speak. The definition for epilogue, the formal definition for epilogue is this: a section or a speech at the end of a book or at the end of a play that serves as a comment on or a conclusion to all that has happened. So it's a closing word, so to speak, and there's just so much here, so much in these verses. I could preach a lot of sermons on these verses alone, on just the epilogue section alone. I could talk about how Job's suffering qualified him to be a mediator between God and Job's sinful friends, and what a beautiful picture that is of Jesus, whose own suffering on the cross qualified him to be our mediator. Or I could talk about how Job's family comes back around only after all of Job's fortunes are restored, and how real friends are realized when you're at the bottom, not the top, when you're at your worst, not your best. Or I could talk about how God restoring all of Job's fortunes times 2 is not, categorically not, a promise that God will give us health, wealth, and prosperity if we are simply faithful and do the right thing. There are a lot of people who have read the end of Job and come to that conclusion. If we do the right thing, and if we're faithful, and if we hold up under scrutiny and under suffering, then God will reward us with goods and riches here and now. That's not what this section is about at all. No, it's a picture with a promise. It's a picture of how the best is yet to come. It's a promise that Jesus is coming back, and when he does, the peace on earth announced the night he was born will become a universal and permanent actuality. Those verses that talk about God restoring Job's fortunes times 2, it's a promise that one day everything crooked will be made straight and everything rough will be made smooth. It's a promise that every wrong will one day be righted, and there will one day be no more sickness, no more death, no more tears, no more division, no more tension. It's a promise that one day everything sad will come untrue. The verses I just read are a reminder of that. It's not some promise that if we're good, God will give us good stuff here and now. If we're good and we give and we're generous, then maybe God will be generous to us. God will be good to us. How wrongfully we can speak about him in a way that ties people up. A God that's all about legalism rather than grace, which Job's friends were. And so what does God do? Because of Job's suffering, Job is now qualified to go and serve as a mediator between God and Job's sinful friends. And what a beautiful, accurate picture that is of what Jesus has done for us.